In this video, I'll show you how to create this animated hamburger menu button. I'm only using CSS and HTML, so there are some limitations, like when you click the X, it won't actually close it. You have to click away for that to happen. But later, I'll maybe improve this with JavaScript and show you how to do it. So to get started, open Visual Studio Code. If you don't have Visual Studio Code, go to code.visualstudio.com. You could use another IDE, but I'm using Visual Studio Code because I'm also using SCSS instead of regular CSS. Don't worry if you've never used SCSS before, it's very easy, especially the way I show you right now. So Visual Studio Code has plugins or extensions that you can add. One of them is called Live Sass Compiler. You're going to need this to use SCSS. So let's start by creating, well, I have a new folder called burger icon that I'm gonna choose as my root directory, and I'm gonna inside there create a new file called index.html. We're also gonna create a new folder here called styles, and inside styles we'll have styles.scss. Okay. In the index file, if you want to create a basic HTML structure, press Shift-1 for exclamation mark and tab, or you can type HTML and then click HTML5. And let's link to the CSS. We don't have a CSS yet, but watch when I click Watch Sass down here in my, what do you call that, status bar. If you don't see it, go to View, Appearance, Show Status Bar. So there should be a Watch Sass there in your status bar. Click on that. As long as you don't have any errors in your SCSS, it should generate a CSS file for you. And you'll be working here in the SCSS, but you'll be linking to the CSS. And the CSS will update automatically every time you save the SCSS file while it says watching down here. And as long as you don't have any errors. Okay, so here, let's link to the CSS file with link type equals text slash CSS, rel equals style sheet, and href equals styles slash styles.css. Okay, next in the body, let's create a header. Inside the header, let's have a nav. Inside the nav, we'll have a div. This will be the container for the button. And these three spans will be the 3 lines. Okay, let's give the div an ID, just in case we put other divs inside the header. Give this one an ID, equals menu trigger. Okay, and just to see if this is working, I want to give these spans a background color and a width and a height. Now these could be divs or spans, or probably a few other elements you could choose, but I chose span just because it has a different name than div. But the difference between a span and a div is span are inline by default, so you can't give them a width and a height. So in the CSS or the SCSS, first let's add header over here. So difference between CSS and SCSS is I can nest things, and this is the main reason why I use it. I can say header, and then inside header I could put a nav. Inside nav I could add the div with the ID of menu trigger. And inside those I can say span. And here I can say background color for the span, I want to be red. Okay. What's this? We got an extra opening tag. looks like, oops, something's extra. Let's save that. Okay. All right, that looks good. All right, so that's what I use this other extension Prettier for. So whenever you have some confusing formatting, like these, for example, you don't know which one's closing tag for what, save it and Prettier will format it nicely for you. Alright, so I've got a span inside a div, inside a nav, inside a header. When you save this, live Sass Compiler should compile that into this. So just a very specific span selector. The span inside the div with the ID of menu trigger, inside the nav, inside the header. But the reason I do it like this is because later it becomes easier to find things because you're organizing it basically the same way you have your HTML organized. You're nested inside stuff. Anyways, the background color on the span is not going to show yet because the span is a inline element. Um, let's open this with live server. So it's going to be empty because inline elements can't have a width or a height. So even if I add a width of 60 pixels, let's say, and a height of 10 pixels, you're still not going to see it because they're inline. So we got to change them to display block. Okay, now you should be able to see them. Now there looks like one big rectangle because they're touching, but if you add a margin to spread them apart, let's say 10 pixels, now you can see it's 3 dashes. Okay, so next we need to animate that, change it to an X. So to do that, we're going to have to, let's add a hover first. So when I hover over the div, I want something to happen. So in CSS, you can add, well, regular CSS, you would do like a colon hover, and that would change what happens to the span when you hover over it, for example. Here we want to hover over the menu trigger, so in SCSS we can say after div menu trigger, I can add another selector, I have to use this and then colon hover, and then open and close curly bracket. Okay, here I could add something like background color green. Okay, but this will change what happens to the menu trigger when you hover over it. Okay, so you can see it turns green. By the way, it's a block level element, and by default they have a width of 100%. That's why it goes from there to there. But we don't want to change the background color of the menu trigger. We want to change the background color of the span. So I could just write another selector here, span, paste that in there. Okay, so now when I hover over menu trigger, span will change the background color to green. Okay, so you can see that's working. But it's not the background color we're trying to change, it's the angle. We want to rotate each of these and have them form an X, right? So we're going to need to use transform, and transform has a rotate, and we can do 45 degrees. Okay, so now they're rotating 45 degrees. Right, but we don't want to rotate each one the same, so we can target them separately using, well, you could give them each a different class name and target that class, but better way is to use nth child. So we can use, instead of span transform rotate, we can say span colon nth dash child 1, for example, for the first child. So the first span inside here. So now only the first one's rotating, and then I can copy this. So now we have one for child 2 and 3. We'll rotate 2 0 degrees, and 3 negative 45. Save that. Okay. Now it's rotating the correct way, but we need to bring this one down and this one up to form an X. So transform also has translate, which lets you move something. You could translate in the X direction or the Y direction. Let's say I want to move something straight down. I could do translate Y, let's say 50 pixels. Okay, but the problem is, you see, it's not just moving down, it's moving diagonally because of the 45-degree rotation. So it's going to make things a little confusing and complicated, so I'm not going to use translate Y. Instead, I'll just use relative positioning. So that means we can add another span here for all of them, because I want all of them to be position relative. Actually, you could also put that right here, position relative. Position relative by itself won't do anything, but it does allow you to now use like something like top, bottom, left, or right, and that lets you move. Let's say I want to move 20 pixels away from the top, I can do that, and everything should move 20 pixels down. It's hard to tell because, yeah, 20 is not a good number. Let's do 60 so it's more obvious what's happening. You can see everything's moving down 60 pixels. But I don't want to move all of them down 20 pixels. I just want to move the top one down 20 pixels. And I want to move the third one up 20 pixels. So instead of saying top 20, I could say bottom 20, but I can also say top negative 20. Okay, so now should form an X, and we can get rid of the middle one by just changing its opacity to 0. Alright. And next we just need to animate this. So to animate it, we can use transitions. So on span, you can add transition, not transform, transition. And what do we want to transition? Well, we have transform happening, we have top happening, we have opacity happening. So easiest, quickest way is to say all. And how long do you want the animation to last? Let's say half a second, so 0.5 seconds. And how long do you want to wait until it starts moving? 0 seconds. Okay, so now you can see it animates. Actually, one thing is not animating. It looks nice and everything, but actually the top negative 20 is not animating because we need to add a top 0 here. Like, where do you want to start from, because we're going 20 pixels down, but starting from 0 down, right? So now, let me save it. Now it animates from the beginning. It also animates the rotation and the movement. Okay, so but we can make this look nicer if we take advantage of the delay, because we do get this delay with transitions. We can delay this rotation happening until, like, let's say halfway through the animation. We want first the movement to happen. We want the top bar to go down, the bottom one to go up, and then we want to rotate it. So you'll see what I mean when I add the delay here. But the thing is, the delay, we don't want to delay everything the same. We want to delay the transform rotate. So the transform is what we want to delay. So we'd have to, instead of saying all here, we'd have to put them separately. We'd have to say transform 0.5 and 0 seconds and comma top 0.5 seconds, 0 seconds. We also have the opacity, which if we don't animate won't be a big deal, but let's just add it anyway. Opacity 0 seconds, or sorry, 0.5 seconds, 0 second delay. So it should still look the same, but now we can delay the transform. Let's delay it 0.25 seconds. Okay, so that looks nicer. But whenever we move away though, going back to the hamburger, I want to do the opposite. I want to first rotate and then do the moving. So that means, so this will affect, so putting this here means it's going to transition one way, actually transition both ways, but if we want to target specifically the transformation that happens once we hover, we could, instead of putting this here, we could add this here. Actually, I'm going to keep both. So this part, we do want, like whenever we're hovering, we do want to delay the transition for the transform rotate, but later we don't want to. We want to do the opposite. So here I would say 0 seconds. Okay, and this one, the top value will do 0.25 seconds. So the opposite of this one. So now that works and that works. So it's just doing it in reverse. Yeah, that's basically the hamburger icon animation.